Hello everyone, and welcome back to Player One Start. Today's kind of a special project video because today I'm going to restore all of my Super Nintendos and get them ready for the Ultimate Super Nintendo review. These systems have been in my collection for a varying amount of years. The Super Famicom is the one I collected the most recent, but I've had the SNES 2 for about the last 7 or 8 years. And of course, I've had the original model of the Super Nintendo for the past 30 years, getting it in Christmas 1991. And I'm actually just now realizing that I have never taken apart my own system. I don't know if that's because it's just always worked and I've never needed to get in there, or if I've just never been curious enough, but today is the day I'm definitely going to have to tear this down. Let's go ahead and start with the Super Famicom. Alright, here are the 3 consoles that I have to get cleaned up and restored before I begin the Ultimate Super Nintendo review. Cosmetically, all 3 of these systems are in pretty decent shape, except for the Super Famicom and Super Nintendo are showing hints of yellowing. The new style Super NES, or SNS 101, is in really good shape with almost no hints of yellowing at all on the console, but there are some black marks I'll need to take care of on it, and of course I'm going to tear it down to make sure the inside is okay, because this is not original to my collection. However, I figured I should start with this Super Famicom, as that is the oldest system in this lot, so let's go ahead and get that taken apart. As I grab the system and flip it around to the back, I notice that thankfully they're using the same security bits that I already have, that I've been using to take apart different cartridges, as well as other Nintendo systems, so this should be no issue for me. But if you're looking for these yourself, you can easily get these for cheap on places like eBay or Amazon. Just note there are 2 different sizes, and it's called a security bit driver. In my opinion, if you're going to get one, you might as well get the other, because you're going to need both eventually if you're going to be taking apart a bunch of systems. Strangely, I noticed that the extension slot cover is not yellowed as much. And I'm not taking my own advice here, but usually I have a little pill caddy tray to put all of the screws in, but since I don't expect a lot of different screws in this console, I didn't do that with this. I'm just using the towel to keep them from falling off the counter. Once all 6 screws are removed from the back, you should be able to slide off the top pretty easily. Just be careful, as there may be some other things that come out with it. Now we got our first look at the inside, and yikes, this thing looks like it's been sitting in a barn. I can't tell if that's hair or straw, maybe even hay. This thing is a lot more nasty inside than I was expecting. The console still powers on fine and was working before this. I just took it apart to see if there was any cleaning I needed to do inside of here, and I'm glad I did, because removing all the caked on dust, hair, and other stuff that's in here will definitely improve the longevity of this system, but man, is it nasty to touch. Usually I like to wait until I get the system more disassembled, but I'm going to go ahead and start removing a lot of this dust now, just so I don't have it flying all over this counter. I went ahead and grabbed some Q-tips that can get into some of these areas that are nooks and crannies that I can't usually jab my fat fingers into, and I have a little bowl of rubbing alcohol so I can dip the Q-tips in it and replenish it without having to keep the whole bottle open. It is about now where I should note that you should be doing this in a well-ventilated area, as the cleaning supplies that I use have some fumes that can become pretty overwhelming very quickly. After getting the largest amount of debris out, I decided it was safe to go ahead and grab my Phillips head screwdriver and start unscrewing the rest of the board. It is also during this process where I'd like to note I'm glad I filmed this, because if I wasn't, I would have very little recollection of where all this stuff is supposed to go back. Now, if you're going to work on consoles, I don't think you should have to film it, but the first time you do it, you should take a picture of what the console looked like before, especially to see if it's missing any parts, because when you put it back together, you'll assume that you lost something, when it could have been something that was gone all along. The next piece to come out after doing all this cleaning is the eject mechanism. It's actually not that complicated, it's just a little spring-loaded lever system here that you can slide out very easily, and I'll set this off to the side and finish cleaning it a bit later. Next, I'll remove all of the Phillips head screws off of the board, including those holding on the power switch. I'm actually going to leave the power switch plugged into the board, because I don't want to lose it or have it roll off the counter somewhere, so that way I know where it's at if I just leave it plugged in. Well, once I unscrewed all of the screws that I could visibly see, I was having a problem getting the main motherboard out still, and I was concerned that maybe there was a screw hidden underneath something in the back, and sure enough I found out the sound card on this board is socketed and comes completely out. I did do a lot of research looking up pictures of what motherboards looked like and some disassembly processes, and I was shocked because I didn't actually see one online that had this configuration. It makes me wonder why the soundboard was built like this. Was it only on early models, or was I looking up the wrong disassembly process? I guess I don't know. But sure enough, there is one screw hiding underneath where that soundboard was located, so I will get that out and the whole motherboard comes out very easily. I had to make sure I didn't put too much stress on the ribbon cable holding the connectors for the controller ports, and with that the motherboard comes right out. Again, I'm going to get some of the bigger debris out of here before I take it over to the sink, but I'm also going to note that I didn't show it on camera, but I'm removing two of these little metal pieces. There's one on the top and one on the bottom. They look like little drain holes in case you spill liquid inside of the system, but otherwise I don't know what purpose these served, but I'll put them back in case they serve some other major purpose. Over to the sink, I'm just going to run this under lukewarm water, in other words warm to the touch, nothing too hot that's going to melt the plastic or otherwise warp the case, and I'm just running water over it. I'm not using any soap or any harsh chemicals here, I'm just literally washing the dust right out. I will let this air dry out for a little bit, but I decided to speed the process along by taking a paper towel and just giving it a good once over, and then I decided to put it in front of a fan to make it dry out a bit quicker. While that dries out, I'm going to turn my attention back to the motherboard by removing this shield and taking a look underneath. The shield is pretty nasty, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that off pretty quick. I am again just using standard over-the-counter rubbing alcohol to get this stuff off. I'm not using anything too strong here. Removing all this caked-on dust should help if any of this is used as a heat sink. Once I was done cleaning off the top, I opened it up and I was surprised to see that it was fairly clean down here. I mean, there's a lot of dust that's gotten underneath it too, but nothing too terrible. I again used a Q-tip to get around the chips, being sure not to leave any cotton traces left on the board in case that were to mess things up in here. But my big concern is this metal casing around the cartridge connector on the board. There is a lot of, again, I don't know if it's hair, straw, grass, I mean, it's just all over inside of this connector, and I decided to use a variety of methods to get this out, but what worked the best was using like a little flathead screwdriver and a Q-tip combination to get in between there. Once I took care of that area, I decided to go ahead and turn my attention to the back of the board, removing all of the dust off of this huge metal heat sink. I'm not going to tear it down any further, as I don't think there's anything left underneath here that I need to get to, and I will spray it out with some compressed air to make sure I didn't miss anything. Once I got the top side clean, I decided to turn my attention to the back of the motherboard to make sure that there was no residue or any liquid damage back here. And as far as I can tell, this looks pretty clean. There's nothing I can see here that's a huge issue. And again, I know the board's already working, so I'm not going to go looking for issues, because I have been known to fix things until they are broken. I will also just wipe off the bottom plate here. I'm not running any of this metal underwater because I don't want to leave any water left there that could lead to rust and corrosion. After that, I decided to turn my attention to this little soundboard. Again, using a cotton swab, I just went ahead and wiped off the whole top of this to get all that caked dust off of there. And now you can clearly see the SHVC-sound, copyright 1990 Nintendo, but if you took this apart, you would also see a copyright by Sony. Again, it's very boggling to me that they made the soundboard like this. It almost makes me think that because they contracted with Sony to make the soundboard on this thing, maybe they didn't know what the final design was going to be like, so they finalized the motherboard design before this was ready. That is pure speculation on my part, and I am very unsure as to why this is designed like this. If anybody has any insight to this, please let me know in the comments down below, because I'd really like to track down an answer for this for the Ultimate Super Nintendo review. And as I decided to start go ahead and putting this back together, I did notice I had missed kind of deep down in here some spots, so I used one of these little plastic flossers as I'm out of toothpicks to actually get in here and dig out some of the crud that I couldn't get with the X-Acto knife, screwdriver, and Q-tip. None of this stuff is really caked on there, so it doesn't take a lot of effort to get out. It's just in an awkward position, and my little pick that I'm using kept getting stuck in the slot. I'll take one last look on the motherboard before buttoning this back up, and let's go ahead and start putting all the metal shields back together, and then I'll grab the case as it's now done drying, and I'll start reassembling it back together. And guess what? I got about halfway through reassembling this and I realized I did not put these little metal clips back in. I'm not sure what purpose these serve, but I decided to go ahead and put them back in anyway. It really was a shame because I had a hard time getting those soundboard screws to go in with the size of screwdriver I was using, so anyway, now that that's back together, let's go ahead and keep going. Putting the eject lever back in is a bit tricky. I found that it's easier to go ahead and get the spring in position first and then slide the metal rod on, rather than putting the spring on the metal rod and then trying to slide it into the hole. Didn't really work out too well. But after struggling with it for a few seconds, I got it to go in. And there we go, there's the finished product. There was a lot more cleaning needed on the inside, so the outside doesn't look as different. And I decided not to retrobite this because it is not too far off from where it's supposed to be in terms of its original color, and it's going to spend most of its time in a dark windowless basement. So I'm not concerned with it getting further UV exposure. One thing I like about the Super Famicom over the Super Nintendo is the power switch seems much more substantial on the Super Famicom. Just listen to how that sounds. To me, it gives the same tactile touch and feedback as flipping an electrical breaker. Very satisfying to me. So, yikes. That thing was a bit more disturbingly disgusting than I thought it was going to be. The amount of dust buildup in there was... it was a shock to me. The outside of that console had been cleaned up so well when I first got it that I really thought maybe they restored the inside too. But I guess this goes to show, just like with buying a car, you really want to look under the hood with your used electronics so you can see what you're actually getting. I feel much better now that board is cleaned up and all that dust is off of there, because these systems are over 30 years old and I want them to last for at least as long as I'm going to play them. So in order to make sure the chips on the board have a nice longevity or a long lifespan, it's great that I got the dust off the board to keep the chips from overheating. Overall, I'm very glad to have cleaned out this console, and I just couldn't wait to test it to make sure I didn't break anything, so let's go ahead and try out a few games for it, just to see if this console's still functioning properly. And some of these were ones that I showcased in my collecting for my Super Famicom video. If you missed that, I'll put a link up in the corner, and I have a link in the description below. But anyway, let's go ahead and test this out. Well, that's good news. It took a little bit for the video signal to catch up on my TV, but it was doing that before the repair too, so I'm going to count that as normal behavior. While I have this hooked up, I'm going to try out a few other games as well, just to make sure they're all still working. Alright, well, I'm satisfied this thing is still working as it should. And I feel like I have to point out that even though I played some of these games before on their North American releases, it's almost like I'm finding a brand new experience with this system. Legend of Zelda here is a great example. I've played it several times, and I've beat it a couple of times on my Super Nintendo, but playing it again on the Super Famicom, it's like I'm getting hooked back into it, back into my childhood, and I want to try to play through this a bit more. But for now, I'm going to have to move on, as I have other consoles to restore. But as this video is running a little long and I ran out of time this week, I'm going to have to wait to restore the other two consoles until the next video. So stay tuned for those coming out to you next week here on Player One Start. And if that video is already done, there will be a link coming up here shortly at the end of this video, as well as in the description below. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A special thanks to those Patreons you see on screen. Also, if you like what you see, please remember to leave a like and click that subscribe button on your way out. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.